Honestly, I'm getting very frustrated here, even with this hearing on impeachment. I'm getting frustrated by all the so-called legal analysis that's taking place, by people who apparently do not comprehend what impeachment is about, the history of impeachment, or even the phrase in the Constitution. If you look at Federalist 65, Hamilton describes it, not with specificity, but he does a pretty good job explaining what they meant by treason, bribery, and the most important phrase, high crimes and misdemeanors. The Congressional Research Service does a pretty good job of pulling together what delegates thought and said at the time and at the ratification conventions. And we've had impeachments before in American history of presidents. And it comes down to this, essentially. It is an offense against the public trust. That is, it's considered a political or constitutional crime. Not a crime even within the criminal code, as there was no federal criminal code at the time. I'm talking about an offense undertaken in your office, an offense taken against the body politic, an offense against your country. And it shocks me the number of lawyers on the House Oversight Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, people testifying today. So let me explain to you. Where else am I going to go? Let's start with the basics. Let's put all the Hunter Biden stuff aside. Let's even put all the financial issues aside. And by the way, I don't mean for good. I mean just for the sake of this argument. Follow me, and you'll know more than anybody on TV who's talking about this. The faithful execution of our laws under Article 2 of the Constitution, twice, not once, twice, imposes a duty of faithful execution of the president, who must, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and then take an oath or affirmation to, quote, faithfully execute the office of the president, unquote. These are called the faithful execution clauses of the Constitution. What does the Supreme Court say about this? Because they've said things about this. They've said, among other things, even if a president disagrees with a law that has been adopted by Congress and signed by a prior president, he must faithfully execute that law, whether he likes it or not, unless there is some serious constitutional issue that needs to be adjudicated. What does that mean? Well, they're going around, they're saying, where's the evidence? Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 65 said the Constitution's impeachment provisions described impeachable offenses as arising from, quote, the misconduct of public men, or in other words, he says, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. Such offenses were political, this is Hamilton, not me, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to the society itself. And these offenses obviously can take innumerable forms and simply could not be specifically delineated. So they're delineated at the time the offenses occur. So as a tremendously important example, where people say, well, we haven't reached the impeachment standard yet. Are you kidding me? The immigration laws, I said laws in this country, have been intentionally eviscerated. They have not been faithfully executed. They have not been faithfully executed. Take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Under oath or affirmation to faithfully execute the office of the president. A president cannot, must not unilaterally decide that he will not adhere to federal immigration law and change the entire nature, culture, law of the country on his own through executive orders. and through the refusal to enforce those laws. That is a violation twice of the United States Constitution, and it certainly meets the standard set forth by the framers of the Constitution. What do they mean? We haven't reached the threshold yet. What are they talking about? We've met the threshold 1,000 times. And it's a consequence of this president's lawlessness and his failure to faithfully execute the immigration laws in this country. In fact, to do the opposite, to purposely sabotage the ability of us to enforce our immigration laws. He's committed an impeachable offense. And the inhumanity that he has unleashed on the American society. What do you think the framers of the Constitution meant? This isn't even a close call. 100,000 Americans dying every year from fentanyl. We lost 58,000 men in 10 years in Vietnam. Almost twice as many every year because this president refuses to faithfully execute our immigration laws and secure the border and secure the country. Well, I don't think we've reached the threshold yet. We haven't reached the threshold yet? Want another example? The United States Supreme Court ruled that Joe Biden, the executive branch, simply does not have the power under the United States Constitution. Does not have the power under the United States Constitution to give away hundreds of billions of dollars, perhaps up to $1 trillion, in so-called student loan forgiveness. The court said rightly that violates separation of powers. That is an authority that doesn't belong to Joe Biden. That Congress needs to pass a statute if that is to occur. Joe Biden has ignored the law. Joe Biden comes up with some cockamamie scheme, and before the law can catch up with Joe Biden, before the next court decision can catch up with Joe Biden, what does he do? He grants hundreds of billions of dollars in quote-unquote student loan relief to one of his most important political bases. That's not faithfully executing the laws of the United States. Defying a Supreme Court decision where the Biden administration took the matter, defended the matter in front of the Supreme Court and lost. And then they say, well, screw off. I'll do it another way, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. That's not an impeachable offense. We haven't met the threshold, Mark. What are you talking about? Oh, I know people want to talk about all this is an inquiry. I'm all in favor of an inquiry. An inquiry not to find out if Joe Biden committed impeachable offenses, but to gather and support the fact that he did with overwhelming evidence, pulling it together to show the members of the House, the members of the Senate, and the American people what he has done and the consequences to the public trust, to the civil society, to the American people of his unconstitutional acts and impeachable offenses. We don't need to gather more evidence to prove the impeachable offenses. It's worthwhile to gather more evidence to persuade as many people as possible, given the media and the Democrat Party, that they control the narrative. But as a purely constitutional matter, the language in the Constitution, the history behind the impeachment clause, is there simply any question that when a president not only refuses to faithfully execute the laws and takes an oath to do so twice. The framers put it in the Constitution. You are to faithfully execute the laws. The one he does worse, in fact, he sabotages the laws, he ignores the laws, he eviscerates the laws. I think we've met the threshold, don't you, ladies and gentlemen? Maybe ask the families of the 100,000 people who've died. Maybe ask the people who've been raped. Maybe ask them. Supreme Court. They go on and on about Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans who are a threat to democracy. And yet, who is it that defies the rule of law? Who is it that defies a Supreme Court decision after losing in that case? Who is it that's breaking our immigration laws? They are. Because that's the Democrat Party. I feel that the House Oversight Committee would have done and would do a far superior job if it let off. If it let off, as I have, with the obvious violations of the Constitution and the constitutional crimes, if you will, or political crimes, if you will, as the framers talked about it, against the public trust, against the governmental system, the abuse of power, the failure of him to uphold his oath, to faithfully execute the laws, and the inhumane, hellish conditions he's unleashed on the border and in the interior of the United States. This is exactly what impeachment was for. Exactly what impeachment was for. And let the Democrats defend them. Let them defend what Biden has done. Let them defend the inhumanity on the border. Let them defend the indefensible. That's how I would start. And same with the student loan violations. Seizing the authority of the House of Representatives, specifically in Congress generally. Its core power to tax, to spend, to borrow, seized by Joe Biden to give relief to his political constituents so they come out and vote and thank him for giving them money that he has no authority to give to them. According to the Constitution, according to the Supreme Court. Why wouldn't you lead with these two things? Now, the case of the financial fraud and all is overwhelming. Don't get me wrong. But everyone gets into the weeds. Well, he didn't prove that. He didn't take money for... Okay, now, after the break, let's move on to the bribery issue, to the money issue, to the bought and paid for issue. Because that comes down to another simple argument. Under the Constitution,